Mel Gibson didn't walk onto the set of The View expecting a warm welcome. He wasn't naive. The moment the invite came through his agent, he knew it was a setup, disguised as conversation, built like a trap. The audience was buzzing as he stepped onto the brightly lit stage, calm and composed in a crisp navy blazer. He nodded to the crowd, gave a modest smile, and took his seat across from Whoopi Goldberg, Behar, and Sunny Hostin. The air was tense, polite, but tight like a rope pulled taut. Whoopi leaned forward first, all rehearsed charm. "So, Mel," she said, voice calm but with that razor-sharp undertone, "you've been pretty vocal lately. This 100% tariff on foreign films thing. You really think censorship and economic nationalism are the answer now?" The audience gave a light, nervous chuckle. Mel didn't flinch. "Supporting American workers isn't censorship," he said, tone steady. "It's survival." The silence that followed was thick. Then Behar jumped in louder. "You say you're protecting jobs. But isn't this just a cover to push Trump's agenda? Why you?" Mel turned to her, expression unchanged. "Because I've watched this town for decades. The moment Hollywood stops investing in its own people, its actors, crews, neighborhoods, it becomes a slave to markets that don't care about our culture." Some clapped. Others didn't. The shift had begun. Sunny narrowed her eyes. "You talk about culture, Mel, but come on. You've got a history, ugly remarks, sexist, racist comments. Are we just supposed to forget all that because you're waving a flag now?" It hit like a hammer. The studio fell dead silent. Mel didn't blink. "I made mistakes. Big ones. And I paid for them. But the fact that I'm sitting here today means something. I chose to face it, and I'll keep facing it, if it means I can help fix what's broken." No applause. Just a heavy, waiting pause. Then a single clap. Then another. The tide began to shift. Whoopi tried to steer it back. "But tariffs don't fix character, Mel. You're talking about economic walls. What about the emotional ones you've built?" Mel leaned in, voice dropping just slightly. "You don't tear down walls by shouting at people. You tear them down by listening, even to the ones you disagree with." And there it was. The room froze. Not from shock. From confusion. They weren't expecting that, not from him. The narrative cracked. By the time they rolled into the second segment, the energy had turned. The teleprompters still read light political banter, but nothing on that set was light anymore. Joy shuffled her cards. Sunny whispered something to Whoopi. The cameras kept rolling. Mel sat still, calm, fingers tapping the armrest, not out of nerves, but rhythm. He wasn't reacting. He was leading. "So let's talk economics," Joy tried again. Sharper this time. "You think slapping a 100% tariff on foreign films is gonna help jobs? That's just gonna start a trade war. Make tickets more expensive." Mel nodded slowly. "I get it. Tariffs sound aggressive. But you know what's more aggressive? Shipping post-production overseas. Casting with cheap labor. Gutting American crews just to save a buck." He turned to the audience. "We're not competing anymore. We're being undercut. And if we don't draw a line, Hollywood becomes a ghost town." Scattered claps. A lone cheer. The control room was sweating. Sunny leaned in. "That's not how capitalism works. If you can't compete globally, maybe you're not offering enough value." Mel's jaw tightened. "Capitalism only works if there's fairness. Right now, this isn't a race, it's a fall. And workers are the first to hit the ground." Whoopi shot back. "Sounds like a union talking point." "I'm fine with that," Mel replied, quicker now. "Because the guy holding the boom mic? The woman editing footage, till 3 a.m.? They're not driving Lamborghinis. They're trying to pay rent in Burbank." Another pause. Then claps, stronger, longer. Joy pivoted. She pulled out a printout. "In your last interview you said, and I quote, 'America should stop pretending globalism is the answer to everything.' That's your stance." Mel didn't even glance at the paper. "Yes. Isn't that just isolationism?" "No," he said. "It's prioritizing what's real. We let globalism become a mask for exploitation, of workers, of culture, of trust. I'm not saying we shut the world out. I'm saying we stop selling ourselves short. The sentence hung in the air like fog. That's inescapable. Sunny shook her head. You're turning this into some kind of populist crusade. Mel leaned forward, calm but unshakable. No. I'm reminding people they deserve better. And just like that, the dynamic cracked again. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. We'll be right back, Joy said, eyes darting toward the camera. As they cut to commercial, the hosts exchanged looks. This wasn't going as planned. And they were running out of ways to stop it. The break was brief, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Something had changed. Back on air, the studio lighting was the same, but the atmosphere wasn't. The applause signs blinked as usual, but now the clapping came slower, more deliberate, less obedient, more curious. And Mel Gibson, who had walked in with a storm brewing around his name, was now the one controlling the weather. Joy Behar attempted to reset the tone, her voice light but her eyes sharp. So let's talk economics, she said, her fingers twitching against her note cards. You think slapping a 100% tariff on foreign films is the answer to saving American jobs? Won't that just spark a trade war and make it harder for people to afford going to the movies? Gibson didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, as if she had asked the most sensible question all day. I get it. Tariffs sound harsh, he said calmly. But what's harsher is how Hollywood has gutted its own workforce, sending post-production overseas, hiring non-union labor in countries with no protections, all to shave a few bucks off the budget. We're not competing anymore. We're being replaced. The beat. Then a ripple of applause. He turned slightly, addressing not just the panel, but the audience. If we don't draw a line, Hollywood becomes a ghost town. Empty lots. Shuttered studios. Crews who've given their lives to this industry with nothing to show for it. That wasn't a political line. That was personal. Sunny Hostin leaned in, her tone tight. But that's not how capitalism works. If you can't compete globally, maybe your product just isn't good enough. Mel's jaw flexed slightly, but his voice remained level. You know what else capitalism needs? Fairness. A grip on reality. This isn't a race anymore, it's a free fall. And the people falling first are the workers. Whoopi Goldberg tried to steady the ship. That sounds like a union talking point, Mel. Gibson didn't hesitate. I'm fine with that, he replied. Because the guy holding the boom mic right now, the woman who stays up editing this show until 3 a.m., they're not raking in profits. They're just trying to keep their lights on in Burbank. Another pause. Longer this time. A few more hands clapped. A voice from the back row murmured, "That's real." Then came Joy's pivot, measured, calculated. She slid a printed quote toward him. "This is from your last interview," she said. "You said, quote, America should stop pretending globalism is the answer to everything. That's your stance." He didn't even glance at the paper. He looked straight at her. "Yes." Joy raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that just isolationism?" "No," Mel answered, voice firm. "It's realism. We've let globalism become a polite word for exploitation, of workers, of culture, of loyalty. I'm not saying we build a wall around ourselves. I'm saying we stop selling out." His words landed hard, like he wasn't trying to convince anyone, just daring them to disagree. Sunny exhaled, clearly trying to find an opening. "You're turning this into some kind of populist crusade." Mel leaned forward, still calm, but locked in. "No. I'm reminding people they deserve better." That line shifted the air. It wasn't just the audience that noticed, the hosts felt it too. Joy's next words came just a touch softer. "We'll be right back." But even as the camera panned wide for the commercial break, the hosts looked unsettled. The usual script, ambush, backlash, containment, was falling apart. The producers scrambled behind the scenes, whispering through earpieces. A stage manager gestured for more audience engagement. The applause sign blinked harder, faster. But it was no longer needed. The crowd wasn't reacting to prompts, they were reacting to presence. Mel Gibson wasn't just defending a position anymore. He was dismantling the premise that he wasn't allowed to have one. When the show returned, Sunny Hostin didn't waste time. Let's not pretend the past doesn't matter, she said, her voice steady but unmistakably confrontational. You've said things. Hurtful things. Racist. Sexist. Are we just supposed to forget that because you came here and made a few decent points? The studio went quiet. Dead quiet. Mel didn't blink. I don't want anyone to forget, he said. I was angry. Reckless. I hurt people. And I've owned that. I've paid a price, and I still do. He paused. Looked across the room, not just at the hosts, but at every person watching live or at home. I knew you'd bring this up. And you should. Because growth doesn't come from avoiding the past. It comes from dragging it into the light and asking yourself if you're still the same man. Silence. Not tense. Reflective. Then a slow, single clap. Then another. Until it was no longer isolated. Joy tried to grab the wheel again. How do we know this isn't just a rebrand? A comeback tour? Mel smiled faintly. You don't. But if I wanted applause, I'd be selling a sequel, not talking about tariffs and cultural suicide on live TV. Even Whoopi let out a reluctant chuckle. But Sunny wasn't done. You say you've changed, but this tough guy nationalism? Sounds like the same old Mel in a different coat. That was the moment. Mel leaned in, not angry, angered. I don't think it's tough to want your country to stand on its own 2 feet. I think it's responsible. And I don't think it's nationalism to love the place that raised you and want to make it better. He paused again, then dropped the line that made the air thicken. Everyone's so scared of being called a name that we forgot how to stand for something. That did it. The applause erupted, louder now. Not polite. Not obligatory. The hosts looked around, not panicked but thrown. Not because he'd shouted, but because he hadn't. They were losing something they'd always counted on. Control of the room. And Mel Gibson? He was just getting started. As the tension continued to simmer in the studio, the conversation shifted. What had begun as a straightforward discussion about accountability was now veering into something much deeper. Mel sat back in his chair, his posture almost relaxed, but there was an intensity in his eyes. He wasn't trying to convince them, he was speaking to them, honestly and without pretense. Whoopi was the first to break the silence. You're not asking for redemption, Mel, she said, her voice calm, but still carrying a weight of suspicion. You're talking about truth. But truth has a funny way of looking different depending on who's telling it. Mel's eyes flickered for a moment before he responded. I've been living in the truth that the world gave me. And let me tell you, it's not a pretty one. You can't escape what's been written about you, what's been said about you. It follows you. You live with it. But here's the thing, I don't owe you that version anymore. The words hung in the air. A slight ripple of murmurs passed through the audience, but no one interrupted. Mel's declaration was startling, but also strangely compelling. It wasn't arrogance, it was a man standing firm in his own understanding of who he was. Even after everything, he still knew his worth. He didn't need their approval. What he needed, it seemed, was to be seen. Joy shook her head, a skeptical smile playing at the corners of her mouth. So now we're supposed to believe that you're a victim of the system? That's your truth? Mel didn't flinch. He met her challenge head-on. No, Joy, I'm not a victim, but I'm a product of the system. I've been shaped by it, like so many others. You put someone in the spotlight, you tear them down when they falter, and then you move on to the next. It's a cycle. His voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact. The anger that had been so visible in his earlier moments had now faded into something more like resignation. It was as if he had accepted the reality of the world he inhabited, the reality that none of them could escape. I'm not the villain you think I am, he continued, his eyes never leaving Joy. The real villain is the system that creates people like me. People who are easy to point fingers at, who have to carry the burden of public outrage until they break. The room grew quiet. There was no mocking laughter, no snide comments, just the sound of Mel's voice filling the space. His words were heavy, but not in a way that made people uncomfortable. Instead, they invited reflection. His tone wasn't pleading, but it was raw. Unfiltered. Sunny leaned forward, her face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. But don't you see, Mel? She asked softly, her voice almost pleading. This isn't just about a system. It's about you. You made choices. You said things. And it all has consequences. Mel didn't respond immediately. He paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, he said, I know. I don't deny that I've made mistakes. But the thing is, I've been living with those consequences for years. And not just in the headlines, not just in the tabloids. I've been carrying them every day, in every room I walk into, in every conversation I have. So don't tell me about consequences. I'm still living them. The room was completely still now. The tension that had been building, the uncertainty, the frustration, it all seemed to pause in that one moment. The weight of his words settled over the panel, the audience, and even the crew behind the cameras. Whoopi, who had been quietly watching him, spoke again, her voice a little softer than before. So, you're saying you've paid your price? Mel's gaze softened slightly. Not in the way you think, he replied, his voice quieter now. There's no magic moment when it all disappears, no clean slate. It doesn't work that way. But you can choose to not let it define you. That's the difference. The world might be quick to judge, but I'm the one who has to live with myself. And I choose to face it head on. The silence in the room felt different now, not heavy or accusing, but understanding. The audience had been swept along by the conversation, carried by Mel's quiet but powerful honesty. It was clear that he wasn't trying to defend his past, but instead to illuminate the truth of the human experience, the mistakes, the pain, and the acceptance that comes with it. I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness, Mel said, his voice gaining strength. I'm here because, for once, I want to say my piece. I'm tired of being the punchline. I'm tired of being the villain. I'm tired of being defined by what people want me to be. I want to be seen for who I am now, not who I was. Whoopi nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of his words. That's fair, she said, her tone almost approving. But just because you say it doesn't mean we all see it. We don't get to rewrite your story for you. But maybe, just maybe, this is a start. The room was still, the camera lights shining brightly down on them, but the atmosphere had changed. The conversation wasn't over yet, but something had shifted. It wasn't about the drama or the scandal. It was about the raw, messy, human journey of coming to terms with one's own story. Mel wasn't asking for absolution. He wasn't even asking for forgiveness. What he was asking for, quietly but undeniably, was the right to move forward on his own terms. To be seen, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as someone who had lived, made mistakes, and was still learning. The audience remained silent, perhaps reflecting on their own lives, their own judgments, their own struggles. The panelists had no immediate response. They didn't need one. What Mel had said resonated in a way that words couldn't immediately encapsulate. And so, the conversation ended, not with the usual sharp conclusion, but with a lingering, thoughtful pause. The cameras slowly cut to black, the music creeping in quietly as the credits began to roll. In the end, Mel had won no argument. But perhaps, in the deepest sense, he had won something far more significant: his own truth.